evidence for God. I actually hold the position that the concept of God is incoherent. So, yeah, that's basically my position.
The title of this is Christianity versus Atheism. Kudos for you for taking such a strong position. Danny, do you have anything to add?
Well, I guess just to elaborate, the idea is that that if God's incoherent, right, we wouldn't expect to see evidence, but I think there's also if we were to grant that God exists, that it would be difficult in verifying that either empirically or by observations, as I say, evidence, as God wouldn't generate any predictions, right? We don't know what we would expect to see if there were a God. After all, Christians want to say that God didn't have to create. So we could expect to see a universe. We could also expect not to see a universe. So the universe doesn't itself confirm the hypothesis. So I think I would add that even if he's unsuccessful in doing that, I don't think there would be evidence, or we couldn't identify anything as evidence, even if he were to exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very thoughtful position. So I'll go ahead and give it sort of a quick summary of my position that is in contrast to that, right? And we'll try to find the sort of pivots in our positions where the fundamental disagreement lies. So my position is actually the classical theistic one, that there is a God and that the outline of his properties, not necessarily everything that can be known about him, but the properties that can be known be reasonably articulated in a logical and coherent manner, and that there is evidence for God, but they rely on one fundamental assumption, which is that human reason is capable of actually knowing things rather than just creating models of reality that do or do not make predictions. And based on past experience, this actually might be the fundamental difference in our worldviews, which sort of percolates out from there. So I believe that ideas or knowledge can actually reflect the same form that exists in nature, such that if I know that the sky is blue, the sky actually is blue, and those types of things, that the thought in my mind actually has a correspondence to the actual outside, and it's not just that I model the sky as blue and am able to make predictions and have found falsification, but it might not really be blue. It might be some other thing that isn't associated with the color, but due to the limitations of my consciousness and senses, I see it as blue. And this is a strong position. It's sometimes known as the dogmatic position, which is sort of a thing, right? Two of the major schools in ancient thought were the dogmatists and the skeptics. And it basically came down to the dogmatists thought that you could know things, and the skeptics thought that you couldn't. And some of them thought that you could know that you didn't know things, and others said that you can't really say even that. Um, and it sounds, at least based on the initial discussion, that Yuri and perhaps you too, Danny, think we can know maybe some things, but I'd like to sort of probe that as the next thing. And of course, I've taken about 3 minutes, and I'll go ahead and let Josh have his 5 minutes to summarize. But that's basically where I think the thrust of my discussion is going to be, is the nature of knowledge, and then how does that percolate into other things that we may or may not know.
I didn't know if Josh is the only one that hasn't spoken. I didn't know if we wanted to give the floor.
Yeah, let's go ahead and give Josh the floor.
Yeah, well, there's many arguments I like to go over. For example, the standard cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument of whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. Now, you could argue with scientifically fill in these premises, but you could also argue philosophically against the mere possibility of an actual infinite, or another argument, the mere possibility of forming an actual infinite by successive addition. I discussed this with Dr. Graham Oppy, one of the leading philosophers, atheist philosophers today, and he had not much to say about that. And I also referenced his book Arguing Against Gods, and it doesn't seem plausible. You have David Hilbert's Hotel. You can think of an infinite amount of rooms in a hotel. If one addition is added to that hotel, what do you have? You have infinity plus one. But in transfinite arithmetic, you cannot add to infinity. So that shows infinity is just a concept in our mind and doesn't correspond to to physical reality. It's a good device when we're doing it on paper, but it like other things, it doesn't correspond to lived life or physical reality. In fact, I don't think a lot of things correspond to reality, including atheism. I think atheists live as though God exists. They live according to a hierarchy of value. William James, American pragmatist, he says that when we perceive something with our senses, and again, that's presuming that our senses of eyesight and hearing and the other senses are cognitively reliable. Our cognition is cognitively reliable. We're getting almost an infinite amount of rushing data into our senses, and there's an infinite way to look at something. Now, how do we decide? Well, we decide by the attentive process and selection mechanisms and pattern recognition. If we did not do that, if we did not focus in on something, on patterns in the real world, we could not know anything. So a lot of these arguments for theism, the cosmological, the teleological, the moral argument, they have a long history, and I think atheists shouldn't be so quick to dismiss them. We all live according to a hierarchy of value, and throughout history, these arguments have become more sophisticated. So instead of the atheist trying to use, mere logic or pure reason, as Immanuel Kant in his critique of pure reason said, we need to look at history and philosophy and something that Thomas Reid said, common sense, the Scottish common sense school. I think that the atheist has a huge burden of proof, because I think God at the end of the day is a properly basic belief that we can immediately know. I'll pass it on to y'all.
Yeah, so Danny or Yuri, whoever feels that they can make the next response.
Okay, well, I think the Kalam cosmological argument has various problems. One of those being is that I don't understand. I think the Kalam leads into atemporal causation, which I think is incoherent. If we are going to run the Kalam, I would want to know why one would accept the first premise. So if we want to go over to Kalam, I guess I would ask that.
Okay, Josh, do you want to do this, or do you want me to? I guess I will. So the first premise is that which begins to exist has a cause.
Right, yeah, why would I accept that?
Okay, well, there's a really quick way that we can look at this. So let's assume that is not the case, that that which begins to exist does not necessarily have a cause. So if that's the case, what would that mean? That would mean that, at least in some circumstances in life or reality, that it would be inappropriate to look for the cause of something, right? So the issue is there's no circumstance where we actually use that as the the stopper for investigation. There's no situation where we would say, well, you know, this person or this tree just into existence with no cause. That would not end up being a satisfactory, I don't want to call it explanation, but a satisfactory reason to stop investigation. And so basically, this comes into the issue with the principle of sufficient reason. And the issue with the principle of sufficient reason, which is basically that everything has an explanation. If not everything has an explanation, the fact that something doesn't have an explanation can't be contained within a specific domain. And so that things not having explanations would be appropriate in all domains, because applying to itself, if something doesn't have an explanation, the fact that it doesn't have an explanation itself might not have explanation. So there's no way to cabin it into a specific domain like existence alone, or certain states of affairs like the state of the affair of the universe alone.
More of an
And
angle
so
that
that's sort of the thing that ends up rising or falling is, if we don't accept the premise, we end up having to accept no explanation for anything possible.
When you say explanation, are you referring to, like, what do you mean by explanation there?
So an explanation is a ground for something, right? It's a rational precursor to the state of affairs, and there are ways to look at this with regard to causation and sort of the Aristotelian sense of causation, and there are also broader ways to look at this in sort of like the logical precursors of things.
Well, presumably, I would think you guys hold the position that God calls time, right?
I don't know what that would mean, but God is the ground of time. That's certainly true.
I don't understand how you're using ground there. Can you explain that?
Sure. Cause means, in sort of an Aristotelian sense, that A causes B. Um, the issue is that God isn't an object among objects, and God is more like being itself, or to use very precise language, God is the ground of being. That is, God is that which being relies on for its quote unquote existence, if you can say being exists. So in the same ways that being does, time does.
So you're saying that time grounds itself?
No, I said that God grounds time.
Oh, God, ground. I gotcha. So basically, I take grounding to be some sort of dependency relation, right? And so it doesn't make any sense to me to say that God grounds all things, right, or grounds time, because that would mean that God would have to ground itself.
Well, but God isn't an object, right?
Wait,
So
God is an object, so does that mean God can engage in like causal relations?
Uh, well, so the analogy that's sometimes helpful is, let's imagine for a moment that the universe is a simulation, right? So a simulation, be it a video game or virtual reality or whatever, has rules of causation within it, right? And there is something that actually running on a substrate, which is, in the case of a simulation, the computer itself and the program that makes it. Now, in some sense, the way that the Christian and to a lesser extent the deist and general theist looks at it is that God is that which runs the universe simulation, right? He's the programmer. He's in some sense the hardware that it runs on, and so that he can cause things to occur, but he is not bounded by the rules that we in the simulation are.
What are some of God's so you said? Oh, go ahead, Dan. If you want to interject, that's fine.
Well, I just wanted to see if I could clarify what Yuri was saying, and maybe this is not what he's saying, in which case he'll just correct me. But we can imagine a world in which there's just God, right? We can imagine a world in which there's just God. And I take it that you take God to be atemporal, right? Is that correct, RedPill?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, so what that would mean is that in a different world, in which there are other concrete objects, let's say like a universe, would be time, whereas that of the original world with there's God, there would be no time. So in some sort of way, God explains the existence of time. Now, I take an explanation to be a kind of causal connection, and I think the problem that Yuri wants to highlight is that it's hard to conceptualize what causality is without being up like an event. An event is a temporal notion. So I think that is that somewhat what you were going for, Yuri?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to segue into. Yeah, exactly.
Sure, and it's hard to conceptualize that, right? And part of it is we are actually basically at the limits of human language and logical tools when we start talking about God, right? Because the God is unlike everything else, and that's why it's an important question, right? Is that God is unlike everything else, and so the and this brings up two questions, right? Is that if God is unlike everything else, are we able to know or grasp things about God using our cognitive abilities, or if God exists, does that mean that, or in the loosest sense of exist, does that mean that he has to, in some sense, give any knowledge that he can about himself to us? And so I guess the to answer your question, Yuri, it is hard to think about time having a cause or a dependency that is not time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is a incoherent concept, because we're able to use more broad understandings of things like grounding to have some understanding of this.
What do you mean? I don't understand what you meant by the last part. Because presumably, if you were to present the concept, right, and I refute how that concept is incoherent, because what we were trying to get at, right, if time has an explanation, right, or a cause, and God engages within causal relations, right, I take causal relations to be some sort of temporal notion. I don't see how basically the two can interact. So if I show how that doesn't work, it doesn't. Maybe I don't understand what you mean by broader understandings of grounding.
Sure. So, and this is why I basically took issue with the use of cause, because, like you said, a cause is a temporal event, but the relationship to God, to creation, isn't necessarily temporal in nature, because
What does that mean?
well, you just articulated that that it's incoherent for an atemporal agent to be the cause of time, because the atemporal agent is outside of time and the causes are events. Events exist in time.
You take creation to be a causal notion, right?
Well, hold on. Let me get in here. There are two ways to look at this, and Andrew here has one kind of way. Think of God as timeless. I believe that's his view. mine is that God is in time and needed to produce a temporal effect. So I think the cause and effect would be simultaneous to bring about the universe. Now, look where the atheist, if he doesn't believe that, look where he has to go. He has to believe that the effect came about at the Big Bang without its antecedent cause. That would mean that the universe came into existence uncaused and out of nothing, which, if we're going to think reasonably with common sense here, we have to presuppose some ground up being, either the way Andrew construes it or the way my atemporal understanding of God construes it.
I do have a question actually. If you think God's in time, I think that infringes upon his aseity, as time would be necessary. Surely you believe God is a necessary being, meaning that he exists in all worlds, all possible worlds. And that would also mean that if God's in time, that time is necessary.
How
And
does that infringe on God's necessity? Because
God's aseity. God's aseity.
Okay. How does that infringe on it?
Could you give a sort of a layman's explanation for our listeners of aseity in this context?
Yes. So the idea of self-existence is usually solely attributed to God, right? That when we talk about God's necessity, God's aseity, that these are usually just properties that are exclusive to God. And I think that if we say that something like time is a kind of concept in which is present in all scenarios, in all possible worlds, then suddenly it also, both of those properties are ascribed to time, which means that God is not the only object or concept out there and which has the property of necessity and self-existence.
Yeah, I don't see how that's a good argument. I'm trying to conceptualize that. I really don't see how that's a good argument.
Well, do you think time is necessary?
No, I don't think time is necessary. I think time
Okay,
didn't
wait,
have
that's
to
interesting
exist.
though. That's really
Hold
interesting.
on, let me finish. I didn't think time has to exist in like a Newtonian view, like a Newtonian absolute time. I'm more of thinking time is relational. It has to correspond to something. So I do think that there's a first moment of time at the Big Bang.
Do you think God's in time?
In time now, I do.
So
think God.
so God.
Wait, so you think, oh, go ahead, Danny, sorry.
Like, you think God's atemporal then? Because you said you disagreed with Mr. RedPill about God being atemporal, or maybe I misunderstood you. If you could just.
God is timeless, sans creation, but in time subsequent to creation. If it's possibly true, as Immanuel Kant's illustration of a billiard ball resting on a pillow from all eternity, if that's possibly true, then God is in time simultaneous with the cause, the first instant of the universe. That escapes your dilemma.
Well, no, I understand that. I think that's a separate conversation. What I'm asking is if you think God is essentially atemporal or whether he's always in time.
Well,
Wait,
yeah. There's a little distinction that we might want to narrow on, and I'm a little unfamiliar with Josh's exact views on this. But when you say God is in time, do you mean that God acts in time, or has some of his being in time, or can you just sort of elaborate on your thought on
Were you speaking to Josh? I was assuming that you're speaking to Josh.
Yeah, I asked Josh to sort of elaborate. I think this is sort of the bone of contention.
I think God had a timeless intent from all eternity to create a temporal effect. So it's not that God took a second to decide to create a temporal effect, but God had a timeless and changeless intent to create a temporal effect. So the temporal nature of the universe is just God. That temporal effect come into realization. So again, I think that averts any possible criticism.
The what I had asked was about God's attributes, right? Do you think God is necessary? You don't think God is necessarily in time, is that correct?
God did not have to create the universe. No, and then
Okay.
there would be no time.
Okay, so then
because I view time as relational.
right. So then there's no confusion. The idea is that I presented two possible worlds: a world in which there's just God and no creation. There's no time there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't buy those possible worlds because
Are you a necessitarian?
I don't know if there can be possible worlds.
Wait, so are you a necessitarian? Do you believe that there's only the actual world?
I don't know. I don't know if that's what if I'm called that.
Well, do you just believe there's an actual world? You don't have to call yourself a necessitarian.
I'm an anti-realist when it comes to this. I don't think our understanding binds to that. I think God
Yuri
had
and I are
had
not.
a free choice.
Yuri and I agree with you that we're not modal realists. We don't think that there are all worlds or they some actualized. We don't. We agree with you there.
So why not look at
Right, we're just saying when we say possible world semantics, we're just referring to the way things could have been.
So
and I think that if you
let me ask, why not look at the effect and say that if God wasn't the cause behind the universe, then the universe would pop into existence uncaused out of nothing.
That's what we were discussing with RedPill right now. RedPill agrees with us that saying that God caused time or a thing that brought about time seems to be incoherent. And I think you two disagree on that point.
Well, we do disagree. We have different views on the nature of time. Andrew thinks God is timeless. And I think we live as though metaphysics is essential. But I am more the William Lane Craig camp that thinks that God is in time right now. So there are different ways.
Wait, so you're saying that God entered time?
He entered time at the Big Bang.
Yeah,
wait, but entering is taken to be a temporal notion.
It can be, like I brought up the analogy from Immanuel Kant, the billiard ball would rest from eternity on the pillow. And that's why Immanuel Kant came up with the notion, you can prove God created the universe, but you can also say that the universe is eternal.
But wait, does that address what I said?
I don't see how that doesn't address. If that's even possible, that the cause and effect are simultaneous, then you have to look at the universe coming to existence uncaused out of nothing. So to say that God is more plausible than that.
But that's not our problem, right? You're here to defend the Kalam, not for us, to say what's implausible or not.
I think what you're trying to look.
The Kalam was only one of my.
So let's go ahead and take about 30 seconds to stand back and take a little bit of a timeout so that we can get this untangled.
All right.
30 seconds of a what? Of trying to get back.
A rest.
Oh.
Yeah, just a rest, and I'll attempt to guide the conversation again.
Now, I just hope we don't, focus only on the Kalam, because I also presented 4 or 5 other arguments.
Yeah. So
I presented some arguments as well regarding God's incoherence. So it would be great. Yeah. So,
sure.
Yeah, we should move on. Yeah.
Okay. If everyone feels comfortable moving on, we can go ahead and move on.
Well, not like move on in that sense, but if we can get off the Kalam, we can finish our discussion with the Kalam and move on to something else. That'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to address this overall. So, Josh, you brought up the idea of a cause and effect occurring at the same point, right? There's some kind of simultaneity going on there, and as long as that's possible, that addresses the problem kind of a temporal causation.
I think so.
Right. Now, the thing that I have, the question that I have is, do you think simultaneity is a temporal notion?
That the cause precedes the effect? No.
Well, when I say something that simultaneously happens, that just means that it happens at the same time. Do you agree?
Yes. That
Okay.
the cause and effect
So
happen at the same time.
here's the problem. We know that the cause is atemporal, right? We know that God is atemporal. So there's the cause, which is not in time, and then the effect is creation, where there is time.
Could
What
God
happens
have?
at wait, I'm
Here's
almost done.
how
I'm
I
almost done.
answered that. But I
Oh, I
answered
haven't
that.
finished.
Yeah,
How do you know how to address it?
So yeah, let Danny finish,
I'm
please.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, so the point was, if simultaneity means occurs at the same time, then we have the cause, which is no time, the effect being creation, which is time, happening at the same time. That's a contradiction, right? Because
Exactly.
you have a point where there's
Absolutely
no time, you have a point where there is time occurring at the same time. So I don't think that
Absolutely
Filler. Okay, go ahead. You can address.
Let me try to finish. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but Immanuel Kant, he anticipated this criticism in his billiard ball on the pillow and his critique of reason. And God has a timeless intent to create a temporal universe. There isn't a time before the effect arises. The temporal universe at the Big Bang 14 billion years ago would just be God's intention of creating a universe. So because God has unlimited resources, he doesn't have to do something where the cause precedes the effect, but can do it simultaneously. So that would avert that criticism.
Did God bring about the intention? Did he cause the intention?
He had it from eternity past.
So he's always had the intention. Well, first of all, if he's in eternity past, that means God's in time eternally. Which I don't think.
No, it doesn't. It does not. God could be in time means it corresponds to some event. But if God's in a timeless and changeless state, there would be no time. See, you're presuming a Newtonian, Isaac Newtonian absolute
I don't see
space-time
how
model.
I'm doing that. I don't
Yeah,
think
but what Danny's trying to get to, right, is that essentially the reason why he brought up the intention is he's simply trying to posit that there is no explanation for why God created the universe.
But we do posit an explanation. I mean,
What would be the explanation for that intention?
well, I mean, the
Why could God have a timeless?
let me finish, please. The
right.
the Christian understanding is God's grace.
I don't see how that explains anything. Can you exposit a bit more?
Well, I mean, that's literally everything, right? That through God's outpouring is creation maintained and created, and the sins of the world remediated. So, and
Yeah,
I mean, there are other things associated with this, right? God's goodness, our relationship to God, God's mercy. All of these moral attributes actually tie directly to God's ontological relationship with the universe.
but we have the why. What about the when?
Can you? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Basically, what I'm saying is I don't think we have an explanation for why or when it happened. That's essentially for God creating the universe. That's what I mean to say.
I just gave a why, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying no. That's why I moved it on to the when. I'm asking for the when now. For when God created the universe.
But I don't think that's a sensible question.
Danny, do you understand what I'm asking?
I think you're putting your faith in one basket, and this is easily averted if God has a timeless and changeless intention from all eternity that would escape that, divine aseity challenge. So I think it's a plausible alternative. So I don't think we're going to agree on this point. point. So
I think we could
perhaps you
agree.
should.
I honestly think we could agree. I think you could agree that
Well,
God.
let's do the conversation because we've already been on this subject for quite some time.
Okay, so it's not about the fact that we can't agree.
It's about
Can
the
I
fact that we've been on one
can I add
argument and
something?
I presented other arguments, and I wanted to
Oh,
get
if you
your
want to move
other
on for that
arguments.
reason, that's fine. But I think we could come to some agreement.
Can I say
agree
something?
that,
Can I say
No,
something?
Benny, shut up.
have
We're
a
listening to
timeless
British.
Yeah, wait, let me say
um,
something.
Benny,
Give me
shut
some
up.
freedom
I'm
of
gonna
speech.
mute you.
view would answer your criticism. Can you agree on that?
Well, I think we could agree that God, if there is an intention to create, that God brought about that intention. Do you think we could agree on that?
Yes, God's intention is timeless and changeless. That's why we witness the effect of a temporal cause in reality.
Okay, so in a world in which we're
Again, why we need to move on to the other arguments because we keep
well,
Yeah.
if you're not
going on this one
interested,
argument.
or okay, that's fine. We can move on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. We can move on if you want. Maybe we can come back at it again, but yeah, we can move on if that is better.
Well, this is the problem with putting all your faith in one basket. This is something. This is called pure, you know, faith, putting blind faith in all in one basket. Because in the philosophical literature, there have been criticisms to this argument of divine aseity. Also,
Well, I
so
don't think you responded to my argument. I think you failed to do that, honestly.
well,
So
we
so
have
so
arguments.
let's just you know we're more than happy to do like multiple episodes and come down to this. You guys are all thoughtful thinkers here, and so let's go ahead and tie a bow on this for now,
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, that's fine.
and move to another topic.
Should I bring in an argument, or does Josh want to keep going with his arguments? Because we can do that as well. We can just keep
I want
refuting
you.
the arguments.
So
I
go.
want to go
Mhm.
with my arguments that I've already presented. I presented a teleological argument and a moral argument. Then I went to the hierarchy of values, which we all share in the selection and attention process, how we maneuver through a near infinite amount of information. We have to use a selection process to focus on things.
Okay, so you want to go over the teleological argument or the moral argument, or
Yeah, let's go over the moral argument.
okay, so you want to present the premises?
Well, maybe I could present it for the listeners.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Here's a simple one, and of course, Craig and others have presented this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist. 3, therefore, God exists. It seems to me that the atheist lives as though all of those premises are true.
You're a nihilist, or I'm a nihilist.
Is the idea that in order to have objective moral values, that you must have God?
Andrew?
Yeah, my understanding of the strongest form of the moral argument is that for objective morals to have obligation, that obligation needs to be grounded in God.
So, do you think that if someone is obligated to do X, that obligation necessarily came from God?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, so I am incapable to obligate anyone to do anything.
No, you're not.
Which means, if it's the case that I can obligate other people to do things, then that means that all obligations are from God.
Well, the obligation you have is to obligate people appropriately, and that obligation has been obliged to you by God.
I'm not disagreeing that if God were to exist, that He would obligate people, but you're saying that all obligations from God, right?
Okay. So, and sorry, I was ill prepared for this kind of argument. So it'll take me a second to recall the strongest form. So,
Okay.
the strongest form is that the, so the Okay.
Are you okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of how to articulate this in a succinct and simple way. If we have moral obligations that are higher than the authority of any human created authority, those obligations must come from God.
Okay, so let me understand that you're saying that if there are non-human obligations, then there are non-human obligations, right?
Uh,
That those non-human obligations would be God.
well, so I'll sort of illustrate this with an example, and we'll try to get principles from there. So one stance is sort of the anti-realist stance, right? That um, the the way that moral obligations end up being enforced is the only ground that they have, right? The sort of the Hobbesian understanding that the state is able to oblige you to follow the laws because it has the authority to do so, backed up by violence, basically, right? And that those obligations um, are backed up through solely human means, basically, right?
Okay, so let me stop me if I'm mischaracterizing it. So you're saying
Sure.
something like this: we can obligate each other, states can obligate each other, but if there are any obligations that are not from human institutions or individuals, that those obligations are from God, right? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
that seems reasonable. That seems to be on target. Yes.
Okay, so now I would wonder if let's say, can you think we can obligate ourselves to do things? Do you think that's possible?
Yes,
It's not.
but
It's like such a moment. I mean,
yeah.
okay,
So
okay,
yes, that is possible. We can obligate ourselves.
okay. So my question would be, what if I am faced with two different kinds of obligations? Let's say I obligate myself to do X, but then I receive an obligation from God to not do X, right? What is what obligates me to follow one obligation over another?
Uh, well, and so this is sort of the interesting
Common
part.
sense.
Well, the common sense is the tool we use, but there 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 are sets. There's basically a hierarchy of obligations, right? That the sort of theistic understanding is the obligations from God are the highest ones we have. And so those are the ones that actually determine the way that we obligate ourselves in other manners.
Okay, so if I'm faced with an obligation from myself versus an obligation from God, you're saying in virtue of God's obligation being higher, that I should follow that obligation. But I think what you mean by the word higher is just to be that that's the strongest obligation. But I would ask you, in virtue of what is that the stronger obligation over my own obligation?
Okay, I got it. What you're talking about is something that David Hume brought up in his debate with Thomas Reid called sentimentalism. Sentimentalism only takes into well, it has to use a utilitarian framework uh, in the immediate consequences, but it tries to get that utilitarian framework to do what is just. And as you know, this
That's
consequentialist
not my argument at
consequentialist
all.
well, that's the sentimentalism where you get it from, David Hume.
No, that's not true. That's not where
Well,
the argument stems
where?
from.
Hold on.
The actual argument stems
Where
from
do you think
Plato.
you get this? Yeah,
Uh,
What I
so
David
what I presented
Hume.
was from Plato.
let's sidebar the sentimentalism for a moment and or set it aside. Um,
Okay.
so the question, Dana, you asked was in virtue of what is this obligation stronger than the other?
Yeah.
And so the answer to that is the highest good there is, right? That the which to me or which in the theistic framework is being itself.
But that okay. Well, it seems to beg the question there. But let me just preface it with this. I will agree that intuitively I will obey God's obligation over my own obligation or anyone else's obligation to me. I agree with you there that if some being, some God commanded me to do X when I wanted to not do X, I would just feel like I should obey that deity, right?
But
Especially
why is that?
like a Christian God.
Why is that?
There are multiple possible explanations, but that's not the important facet of this.
Well, hold on.
What I'm trying to say. Wait, I'm almost
Before
done.
we
I'm
go
almost
on,
done.
is there a way you could possibly answer that for me?
It could be that I'm just disposed. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The point is that
Maybe
that's not going to serve. That's
you
not,
think
Josh,
it's-
please stop interrupting.
All right.
the point is that my intuition or your intuition that God is the highest good, that it just seems that way, is not going to be an argument. What I would be looking for is that why is it the case that God is the highest good instead of my own authority being the highest good, right? And I would already agree with you on the that it seems that God would be the highest good. I don't think that's a justification for saying that he's the highest good.
I directly perceive God to be the highest good.
Well, you understand that intuition is a kind of perception.
Sure.
Okay, so, and I think we do agree that intuition is not going to serve as a justification.
It certainly will under the right
Yeah.
conditions.
Why not? We
Well,
have to trust our intuitions.
if I have the intuition that I'm the highest good, instead of God, that I am the authority of my life and not anyone else, you wouldn't say that's true in virtue of my perception that I'm the highest authority.
Well,
you're living-
we have defeaters for that, though.
Oh, well, I'm glad I'm open. That's what I want to hear, I suppose.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's assume that you're the highest authority in your life, right? Will it? Okay. So the two questions are: does that both lead to good things in itself, and is it perceived as good in itself, right? So it seems to me that if we think carefully about that, that would not actually always lead to the highest good. If don't have perfect moral character or perfect moral judgment, using yourself as the highest moral authority would not lead to correct outcomes.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand you. I like that. Okay, I'm asking what makes it so that it's false that I am not the highest good, that my intentions are not the highest good, that some maybe like God's are instead the highest good, and you're saying because it doesn't bring about the highest good, and I think more specifically you said the best possible scenario or outcome, right? But to say highest good is just to say the best scenario outcome. So I think you're begging the question there.
Well, okay. So you're saying that the best outcome is you. Okay, so in this scenario, the person claiming the best outcome is whatever outcome comes from me doing what is right, or
Wait,
what
can you repeat that?
that the person who is claiming their own authority is saying the best outcome is that which I choose, basically, right? That's what it sort of comes down to.
Yeah, their intentions are the highest good. That's what they're claiming.
Okay.
Rather than God's intentions or God's desires. To desires and intentions, I take them to be the similar same. So
Okay. So then we have to ask a couple things, right? So they're claiming that is actually uh, the highest good. So the okay, is that a beautiful thing, right? So that's one thing that we can ask is is it perceived by beauty by anyone else except that person?
do you distinguish moral truths or an aesthetic truths? Or do you think they're the same thing?
We have the ability to recognize truth intuitively.
I'm not disagreeing that I carry that intuition. I'm just saying that intuition is not going to serve as a justifier, an epistemic justifier in this case.
We use intuition in our everyday lives, but just when it comes to morality, and because there's a possible way that there could be a truth higher than God, we would simply say that itself would be God living in you through the testimony of the Holy Spirit. So that would be a defeater to your
No, that would be a claim. That's just mere assertion.
Right.
How is your argument not a claim or mere assertion when it comes to common
I don't
sense?
I think you need to understand what I'm trying to say. And what I'm trying to say is I agree with you. Josh, RedPill, I agree with you.
Then why aren't you a theist?
No, wait, listen. I agree with you that it seems as if that God would be a greater obligation on my life than my own authority. I agree with you. I'm just saying there's no argument to that conclusion other than our perception of that truth.
Right, but that's sufficient
But,
unless
but
there's a
not that doesn't serve. If someone said I have different intuitions, I perceive myself to be.
They would be a psychopath. Let's say
Look,
if
I might
someone,
even agree with you
had
there.
the view,
But there would be
someone
no
let me
argument.
finish. Let me finish. If someone had the view that the highest good was to rape and kill someone, they would be a psychopath, and we
I'm not
know
disagreeing.
that intuitively. Well,
What's the relevance of making that point?
It's
well,
okay.
so the issue is that's true of any of the intuitions and properly basic beliefs we hold, right? We basically, I mean, there are coherence arguments, but if you take a foundational epistemology, you have to rely on intuitive perception, on perception for things like the law of non-contradiction, or even that things should be logical. I mean, that has an intuitive appeal.
Canada wants to distinguish a basic belief and a belief that's brought about just by mere intuition. He doesn't think they're the same thing. He thinks that intuition is vitally important for a basic belief, but I believe he inserts other criteria. He talks about proper circumstances, right?
Sure.
He talks about a kind of external, like you brought about his epistemology, a kind of externalism. But if all we have is just our intuition to appeal to, as to obligate someone else to accept that they're not the highest good, then I don't think that works.
Well, what do you mean? Do you mean it's uncompelling to the person who thinks their will is the highest good?
Quite the opposite. In fact, I think if you could persuade them, but just because something is persuasive doesn't mean that it's a justifier. I could persuade you. I could persuade someone that I'm the second coming of Jesus, that I'm Jesus is incarnate, right? But it doesn't mean just because I compelled them or persuaded them that whatever argument or evidence I presented was a valid one or acted as justification. So we're not talking about persuasiveness or compelling.
So are you saying that my perception of the moral obligation, the highest moral obligation coming from God, is not a sufficient justifier? Is that basically the claim you're making?
Not an epistemic justifier. I don't personally have a problem with that. I don't have an argument to say that you can't do that. But I'm saying that you don't have an argument to say that someone thinks that they're the authority, that they're the highest good. Do
you know of any mistake that I'm making?
No, I don't think you're making a mistake other than to say that intuition is the justifier for that proposition.
Well, I'll have to think about it more, but I mean, my direct cognitive perception of it seems to bear that out, and I know it's something that I'll have to think about, but
I think what you're saying is because it's not a necessary and sufficient condition, and therefore it can't be the sufficient condition.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's just ridiculous.
No, you're right. That is ridiculous. I did not say that.
Why aren't you? It seems like you're saying that. We again trust our cognitive abilities to know certain things are.
Do you think seemings are justifiers?
I'm sorry.
Do you think that just because it seems that way, that's the case?
But that's a good justification. No, it's not a necessary justification. But oftentimes it's a sufficient justification.
Well, it depends on the other context, right? So, and Plantinga gets into this a little bit, that if you're in the right environment with your cognitive faculties working appropriately, you'll come to true beliefs. And so the question is whether or not the training that we've received through philosophy and religion and moral training is actually providing the correct context for our intuitions to find the truth of this specific matter. At least that seems to be part of what we're discussing.
Well, I think, we're getting into, I think you're talking about reformed epistemology at this point, which I think that there is a problem with reformed epistemology in terms of whether God has knowledge. If we want to switch to that topic, that's fine. But as long as you understood my issue, but what I presented to you was just a kind of a undercover Euthyphro dilemma, by the way.
Sure.
Okay, and I think that you should think about that. I think it's a pretty good response to the moral argument. But if we want to move on to reformed epistemology, I'll be happy with that.
Before we go, professional philosophers, they're not all that persuaded by the Euthyphro argument. If it's possibly true that God is the essence of goodness, the transcendent ground of goodness, that averts all these criticisms.
Well,
But that would just move the Euthyphro. Oh.
Well, I think what's funny is that I presented the Euthyphro dilemma without even presenting the title, right? It was a Euthyphro dilemma, right? But you didn't recognize it.
That's what David Hume went off on. That's why he made viewed morality in a sentimentalistic way. That's sentimentalism. Thomas Reed responds to David Hume and says that would require, out of necessity, a utilitarian or consequentialist ethic.
That's an interesting claim. I would love to hear the argument, but I don't think. I think we can move on with the reformed epistemology.
Okay, but you want us to do homework. I want you to do homework into Thomas Reed versus David Hume and how he responds by using common sense.
Yeah, I think common sense will boil down to intuition.
Common sense realism is a philosophical school from Scotland, and it doesn't just boil down to intuition. I encourage you and your listeners.
Then we're equivocating on the phrase. I don't know.
Well, I encourage you and your listeners and our listeners to research that.
Okay, well, if we want to move on to reformed epistemology, I'd be fine with that. Or I think Yuri had an interesting argument about intentionality. If we want to do that instead.
Well, are you talking about?
You presented an argument in your opening. Would it be possible that we go to some of y'all's arguments that you presented in the opening?
Yeah, Yuri. I think Yuri.
Danny, do you want me to? Do you think we should do the omnipotence and intentionality one, or do you want to do the great making property one?
It's up to you. You do you, Yuri.
Well,
I guess
since y'all presented, I wanted to talk about. You said God doesn't have identifiable evidence, and God doesn't generate predictions.
Yes, I did say that.
Aren't you presuming?
Yeah, I said.
You're presuming physicalism. An agent won't necessarily.
That's not what. I'm not a physicalist.
Yeah, me neither. We're both naturalists.
If you view the cause of the universe as an agent with gentle causal powers, then it would be absurd to look for predictions by a free agent. You must know that.
I don't know what you mean by that. I'm not a physic. I don't know why you presented physicalism. We're not physicalists.
Maybe it was Yuri that said God doesn't generate any predictions. And God
no, that was me. That wasn't me,
Okay.
but that doesn't commit me to physicalism.
I'm not saying that.
Oh, I misunderstood you then.
If God is a free agent, as we say that he is, then we shouldn't expect predictions. That's not a falsification or an undercutting defeater towards God causing the universe and designing the universe. It seems to me that you're making a straw man argument.
I think you didn't understand what I was saying. I'm saying this. What would we expect in the world if God were to exist? And I don't think that question can be answered because you don't think that God necessarily created the universe, right? So we wouldn't expect that there would be a universe if God existed.
Let me answer that. Okay. I would expect in a broad way, conceptual way, that the universe would have a purpose. We may not know what that purpose is because the content, with just God existing, not creating. But if God did create the universe, we could say that it has some purpose.
Well, if God is omnipotent, right? If we're taking God to be omnipotent, I would just say that I think it's logically possible for God to create a universe that doesn't have any purpose.
Well, actually, I wouldn't disagree, right? That what we would expect is purpose necessarily. I think what we mean by purpose there is just mental. It's kind of mental state, right? Purpose is nonsensical without a mental state. So I think if
But
we
you
were
said God doesn't have any predictive
right,
or properties.
that's
But that
correct.
undercuts your claim.
But no, it doesn't. Because what I'm talking about are scientific or empirical
Okay, I got you.
observations. Right now, I think there
You're
could be
confusing it.
metaphysical entailments, perhaps. Like there would be an intent, there would be intentions, there might be beliefs, there might be quality if there were a mind. But I'm saying that there's no observation that we can make in the sciences that would confirm or disconfirm the God hypothesis.
Well, yeah, but that's because the 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 metaphysical underpinnings of science are held constant.
Well, yeah, but I think, and I might agree. It looks like we're in agreement, but I think that does serve an issue for certain Christians that believe that what they find and experience in the world, or what they perceive, um, it serves as evidence for
No,
God.
not at all, because not all perceptions are scientific.
Oh, well, okay,
Yeah, because
but let's say this.
I would never give God as a somehow scientific explanation. These are
It's not what I'm
philosophical
saying.
explanations.
Let's just take an example of one of Jesus's miracles. Jesus walked on water. Okay. Now, I'm going to say that's evidence for God. Okay, but I'm saying that that's also what you would expect if some laws of nature, if we were to throw out the uniformity of nature out the window, right?
It might be evidence for God if there's sufficient testimony. Then you would have to look at the witnesses, and if it happens over a repeated amount of time, not the same miracle, but if there's a historical religious context to it, that would raise the probability, as the 19th century Anglican Richard Whatley said in his response to David Hume.
Well, and the other issue is any sufficiently uh, elaborate system of understanding has a problem of underdeterminism, where you will actually have multiple models which offer explanations for all incoming data. And the question is, which model do you choose? And that ends up being based on what priors you have or outside of the models themselves.
I think I'm not being understood. Maybe I wasn't clear. I'll use a different example. I've had some friends, or I've posed this to some Christians before, that if we saw life on Mars, right, would that be evidence against God? Okay. And I had a clever answer, right? They would say no, but if there was no life on Mars, would that be evidence for God? And it's funny, that actually struck me, right? Because the idea is that no matter what the state of affairs, the empirical observations made on Mars, it's not going to serve as evidence for God or against God. And I think it applies to our observations not just on Mars, but Pluto, any planet, including on Earth, any observations we make in the universe. It's going to be consistent with God existing or not existing, whether he did it or did not do it.
Let me respond. First of all, you're going at a particular observational event or a particular circumstance. If there's many things, of course, I'm getting back to history, as I love history, and I think that's where we can really get our hands in the dirt. With history, if there's a miracle or a reported miracle with sufficient a number of eyewitnesses or good evidence for it, and it happens over a period of time in the religious context, I don't see why the skeptic would ignore or try to explain away the evidence for the supernatural.
Well,
You're offering, and let me just finish. You're offering an argument for what would verify belief in God through a particular empirical instance or circumstance. And I'm saying no matter what the evidence is, the atheist will explain away based on prior philosophical commitments.
No, I don't think, look, I might even concede that, like, let's say the Kalam works. Let's say the ontological argument works. I think those a priori conceptual analysis of what God is and his existence, if those all work, I think what I'm saying is still true, right?
Sure.
The problem is that there's no set of data, empirical set of data that we could appeal to confirm or disconfirm God. That's all I'm saying. I don't think it's actually that controversial unless you you have the view that you have seen something or observed something empirically that raises the probability of God existing.
Well, the part that we're not discussing is what empirical evidence, special revelation, right? And then I suspect that that's when we're going to run into the underdeterminism issue, because those types of claims that Hebrews make, or Jews make, and Christians make, are not of just the God of the philosopher who has a metaphysical grounding, but who actually interacts with history. And history is, in some sense, empirical.
Yeah, so I think that there's a thing there, right? So you're saying that, okay, well, the philosophical God, or what you're saying, something like this, the philosophical God, you're right, doesn't generate any predictions. We can't confirm or disconfirm it. It's all going to be based on a priori arguments. You see, we're not talking about that God specifically, right? We're talking about the Christian God, right? Who has certain beliefs, who made certain alterations to history. We can appeal to the historicity of Jesus or whatnot. That for some reason, the Christian God does generate predictions, and the philosophical notion of God, the omni God, in which we speak of when we're talking about like something like the ontological argument, does not generate predictions. And I want to hear the argument as to why there is that difference more specifically.
Can I go into predictions? Because Jesus, if it's true, if the resurrection is true, Jesus predicted his resurrection on a number of occasions. Mike Lacona, a New Testament scholar, in his book, it's right here, The Resurrection of Jesus, a new histography approach to the study of the resurrection, he discusses these that how they're historically reliable, these predictions of Jesus. That would be a way that the God of Christianity did in fact predict a miracle.
So to paraphrase your question, Danny, are you asking why does the God of Christianity engage in special revelation while the God of the philosophers does not?
I'm asking why does the Christian God generate predictions in the world and not whereas the philosophical notion of God does not? You agree that the philosophical notion of God doesn't generate predictions, right?
Not in the sense. Well, I'll give an analogy, right? So let's take a botanist and send a botanist to sample the plants in my yard, right? So the botanist comes back and he finds a large variety of plants. That evidence that I actually live there. And then he also, or let's do another alternative scenario that we send the botanist and he finds no living plants in my yard. Is that better evidence that I live there or worse? And part of it is the empirical evidence that science is good at doing basically takes all of the issues that are associated with the problem and sets them aside, and that they don't really give that answer. And I agree that both the Christian concept of God and the philosophical concept of God don't have that similar relation to science in general. The question ends up being is, with Christianity and Abrahamic faiths, whether or not what is the special revelation of God and what relation does that have to God's existence, right? So, and I'm sorry if I end up repeating myself, but that's the thing, is that these the Christian God does make predictions, but they're historical predictions, not scientific ones.
So let's talk about the botanist. I think that my objection actually applies to some to. I mean, really, my objection covers all intentional explanations. That's the problem here. Is that minds, even human minds, don't generate predictions either. That what we do when we say that, oh, if I if I was driving, and let's say I see a row of soybeans, right, that seem to be planted in a deliberate way, right? That I'm drawing on my prior probability, right? But I'm not evoking a kind of scientific law or theory, okay? Um, so I think that's the problem with intentional explanations, and I think in the case of God, it's even worse because we have no prior probability with God. Really, all of our prior probability that we're drawing from is from our other interactions with human beings. So I think that my criticism with the botanist, no, just because you have a botanist in a house, it wouldn't generate the prediction that there would be a nice array of flowers and fruits, or whatever they do, in the backyard, in the front yard, and the side yard. There's that in either case, either whether you see plants in that nice array or not, that's not going to confirm or disconfirm a botanist living in the domain.
Sure, but the issue is what type of evidence or what type of priors are you taking there, right? I mean, the lack or dearth of plants there might not say whether there's a botanist, but the fact that there's like a botany journal there might, and that's empirical evidence. And so I guess the fundamental thing is, and part of it is intentionality and design are different, but they tend to get conflated.
No, I don't think they're that different, actually.
If I could just come in, it does seem that you have an almost you're trumping up the criteria of predictability. There's also other criteria that make an explanation superior, like explanatory scope and power, when it explains different types of data. Now, to discount intentionality in our everyday lives, we don't just plainly give a scientific, explanation for why your car is not starting, and we don't say because the internal combustion. We might say because it was snowing the night before, maybe became frozen. So we're using something called abduction that explains all of the evidence and the inference to the best explanation, not whether or not it meets the criteria of predictability. What say you about that?
Well, should I, Danny?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm just curious, right? I take intentionality to be dependent on the physical, right? So I take it to be a behavior of some type. So if God has an intention to do something, right, we should be able to see that behavior somewhere, right? Since there's a dependency relation between the intention and the behavior, right? If I grant you God being an agent.
Well, see, I thought earlier you said you weren't a physicalist, but
I'm not
now,
a physicalist. I'm not a physicalist.
Like,
I'm not a physicalist. I'm not a. No, can I speak?
No, let me finish.
Because I'm not a physicalist, right? I'm a non-naturalist. I'm a dualist, in fact. I think there's a dependency relation between the mind and the body. I take intentionality to be immaterial or not reducible to the physical. I think there's a dependency relation between that which is immaterial and that which is physical. So I'm not a physicalist.
Do you intend to think?
Do I intend to think? I think that's already self-explanatory.
Okay, can you please explain it for the audience then?
I think thinking or having beliefs, right, is constitutive of me having an intention.
Okay, so are thoughts and beliefs necessarily instantiated in the physical?
They're dependent on the physical, right? But I take thoughts and beliefs to be immaterial.
So that's one example of intentionality that leads to another immaterial thing. So the fact that you don't see physical behaviors in the universe doesn't necessarily imply that the mind running.
No, in order for you to have intention, a thought, or a belief, you have to have some behavior or some sort of thing that's reducible to the physical. So, like, dispositions would be behaviors.
That's not how we look at the world. We don't look at the world and try to reduce everything. In fact, there are lots of phenomena in the world where if you try to reduce to the particular things, to atomistic things, you would be insane and be a sociopath.
I'm not seeing the relevance of that. Can you explain that a bit more?
In our everyday lives, we live as though mind and body are two different substances. Now, they work together and they're closely aligned. We both agree on that. But that is called dualism interactionism, where brain states can cause the mind, have an influence on the mind, and mental states can cause things in the external world. So if you're looking at it simply from a phenomenological perspective, you're not going to jump to the conclusions that you and Danny jump to. You're going to be a dualist interactionist.
What's your point? Do you understand? Maybe I'm lost or missed something. Do you understand what he's asking?
Well, first of all, Josh, do you take it to be physicalist about the mind?
No, when Yuri first started talking, it seemed like that, but he corrected himself.
Oh, okay. Well, we have no problem with the fact that the mind is irreducible, or at least beliefs are irreducible.
Well, I don't think they're reducible to atomic level, but they're substances. Is that
No, irreducible, right?
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I would think that my belief that I'm enjoying this conversation is the same thing.
Right.
Some kind of brain state.
They have no spatial extension. Beliefs have
Yeah.
no spatial extension. They're immaterial, essentially. So they're not. It's even dangerous to say that they're a product of the physical, right? We just believe there's some
Okay.
sort of dependency relationship there.
Well, in that case, I have an argument. Intentionality, I think, shows that God does exist. Let me give the argument. Premise one: if God did not exist, intentional states of consciousness or beliefs would not exist. Intentional states of consciousness do exist, therefore God exists.
Would I accept the first premise? What's the argument for premise one?
Okay. How could an intentional state of consciousness exist without God?
That's burden shifting. I asked you the question.
Well, it's common sense. I mean, I look.
That's just appealing. I don't care, right? Because that's just appealing to common sense, and that's a fallacy. I'm asking you to justify your claim.
If you said that to Thomas Reed would have a heyday with you.
That's just name dropping.
Well, your arguments are coming really from David Hume. There's a name.
So I'm running out of energy, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty moderating this. So let's go ahead and wrap it up.
All right. I guess
that's fine. Is it okay if we? I know we were going to wrap it up, but it's okay if we? I wanted to get an argument out real quick. Is it okay if I do that?
Yeah, please.
So I have an argument actually regarding God not being able to exist because he has intentionality, right? And that has to do with him being omnipotent, right? So I take intentionality to be normative. That means that you can be in or out of accord with an intention, right? So that means if I intend to reach for a glass of water, right, I have the potential to fail. I take intentionality to be constitutive of agency, right? And so since God is taken to be an agent and also omnipotent, and omnipotence implies that God does not have the potential to fail, I think those two are incompatible theses, right? Because I don't think God can have the potential to fail and also be omnipotent at the same time if God has intentionality. Go ahead.
If there's a possible world where God intends to do something, then there is a possible world where God intends to do something without error. That possible world, God intends to do something which is without error, is our actual world. Therefore, God does exist.
Well, I mean, the thing that you've hit on is what the Thomists would say is the analogical use of language to describe God, right? So God is intentional in some sense, that he has aims and agency, but the analogy breaks down when we look at the other aspects of intentionality with humans, with such things as our ability to fail. And so to say that God cannot exist because God is not intentional in a univocal sense with human intention is to ignore the fact that all language used to describe God is analogical in nature.
Well,
Right. So wait. Okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, right? So if we take intentionality, if you're saying that because what you're implying is that you're implying that intentionality can't be normative, right? And when I say that it's normative, I'm just saying be in or out of accord with some standard. If you're saying that, right, I don't know what distinguishes God from a mere mechanism, right? So can you explain how you account for that?
Well, I mean,
Intentionality.
well,
you said that intentionality isn't normative, right? So that means God doesn't have the potential to fail. So I'm not understanding any of this, right?
right. So, okay. So, listen, I'm out of energy, so let's go ahead and do takeaways, and I'll do my best to answer you in text later. Yuri. I'm sorry.
We go.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Since yes, y'all go first. Since y'all went first at the start of the debate.
Well, then you want me to go first, or should I go first?
I'll just take that one, man.
So yeah, I think what's happened today, I think is very interesting, right? I think that we've had a fruitful discussion, but I think some of my questions regarding God, especially at the end, I don't think got thoroughly answered in this debate, and I wish it did so the audience could see, but that's fine, right? Andrew already said that he would get back with me, right? But overall, I think that this debate, was rather fruitful. I wish they would have responded to one of our objections on how God can be atemporal and cause things, and earlier with the kalam. And that's fine. Would you like to add anything? I think, well, just one more thing. I think this has been, a fine discussion and everything. Other than that, I cease the mic.
Yeah. So if we were to do this again, couple of things that I'd be interested in talking about is again the notion of causation. God's atemporality would be something I would focus on. Also, what obligates us to follow God's commands. I think that's an interesting question. It's essentially the euthyphro. I'd be interested in talking about that a little bit more. And then the question of intentionality. The idea is that I don't understand how you can make sense of goals or normativity without the possibility of failure. And if it's the case that normativity or goals don't necessarily come into fruition, then God either is he can fail, right? So this is something that I'd like to discuss in the future, but I do appreciate you having us on here. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I think it's been a very thoughtful discussion with people that have all looked very deeply into these issues and are seeking truth rather than just choosing sort of a ideology that's sort of possessed them. And I really appreciate that everyone's done that, and I'll do my best to do some study and get back with some thoughtful answers. So, Josh, take us out.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to say I appreciate y'all. Y'all seem like really nice guys. And I'm sure we could have y'all on again. Now, in tonight's debate / discussion, I gave a number of arguments, including the kalam, and I also gave an argument for the impossibility of an actual infinite and forming an actual infinite. That part of the argument went unnoticed, it seems to me. I gave an argument from intentionality, the moral argument, and I also gave an argument from miracles, how atheism only has one vantage point, and that is to get a naturalistic or an uncertain explanation towards a miracle. I think that's unsatisfactory. Theism seems to be able to explain a wider range of phenomena, and we simply treat science in its domain respectfully, and intentionality and philosophy and history in their domains respectively. I brought up one philosopher in particular, Thomas Reid, a number of times because he's my favorite philosopher, and his dialogue with David Hume, the greatest skeptic ever. This is what Reed says in this. He says, quote, "We see then that Mr. Hume's philosophy is very much like a hobby horse, with which a man, when he is ill, can keep at his home to his contentment. But just in case he should bring it to the marketplace, his friends would quickly impanel a jury, confiscate his estates, and never leave him alone again, or the solicitude to be alone." That's Thomas Reed. It just seems at the end of the day, there's a hierarchy, and atheism is simply unlivable.
All right, thank you very much. Everyone have a wonderful night. Be sure to check out Apologist Supreme on Twitter. He is in a fun little poll for your favorite Twitter apologist, so vote for him and make sure that he goes up in the rankings. And God bless, and may that which grounds your existence do the very best for you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Wow.
Yuri got fucked.
Yuri,
I got fucked.
Okay, when we're in.
Well, you were doing so well, and you were talking about the morality thing. I was just gonna leave you at it, I could have jumped in. I was gonna go straight into the euthyphro, but you got it.
Yuri, I think most of us only watched because we wanted to hear you and Bristor, really. That's
right. Yeah.
That was all I wanted to hear. Danny, I know you did a good job, of course, because you always do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But
kind of sucked. Thanks.
But I'm sick of hearing you do a good job, Danny. Just stop.
I mean, Yuri should
you
just
guys let him out of the. You guys let him out of the intentionality and eternity thing, though.
Yeah.
What could they have done? I mean, the guys, they wanted to move on. I mean, they were being prompted to move on, 3 or 4 times before they conceded. Yeah, okay, if you want to move on, we can move on.
That was on the Kalam thing, and they were running from the Kalam thing too, on the whole atemporal causation. That just went on. They didn't really have an account for that, and then they.
It seemed like me and Danny. It seemed like me and Danny tag team on the Kalam a little bit, and then Danny took over the end portion of the Kalam. I really wanted to get in, and because Danny kept trying, when he kept saying simultaneous causation or God being able to enter time, I really wanted to show him how entering and being simultaneous is still a temporal notion. But I was able to just get that out. But another thing as well is that I think that Danny did a pretty good job on the moral thing. I think Danny was more concise, when he talked about morality. So I let him at it.
Yuri, I didn't
know. Look, Yuri, I think you when you were speaking, you did articulate yourself well.
I didn't know that you were into cuckoldry, Yuri. Yeah, you did.
No,
all right.
But I'm happy I got at the end. Danny let me get in the end, and talk about intentionality. I really ripped their whole.
Well, let's talk about that, Yuri. When you're tag teaming, whether it would be Jack or Vic, I mean, you use some good judgment, but at the same time, you can be like, wait 1 second, let me finish this, Danny. I'm not gonna be offended by that. You were too stupid to do that.
That's right. I should have been like, sorry, Danny, I'm not done talking.
Yeah, that's actually what you should have done.
Just like I did with the Muslims, I'm like, sorry, I'm not done talking when you tried to interject.
I hope he does that to Jack one day. That would be just the best. Sorry, Jack, I'm not done talking.
Yeah, Danny makes a pretty good atheist.
It's
like the coming of age.
I know, but I know responses to everything that I said, so.
I was really hoping I was going to take over. I was really going to get aggressive when we got into Reformed epistemology. I was going to ask him, how God justifies his beliefs or whatever, and how God can have knowledge. That was going to be fun.
Yeah, on that was great. That would have been a great segue. Danny pretty much rolled out the red carpet by saying, look, Plantinga doesn't just appeal to intuition. He sets up conditions.
Oh my God!
If you'd have brought that up, that would have been wonderful. That would have been
Danny,
that would have
was
been great
so
to hear.
Good when you brought up Plantinga. That was really good.
As far as I'm concerned, it was a plus for Danny because he got to admit that their only justification for how they air quote justify the authority of God is through intuition.
Right.
That right there was the debate. Like
That lasted a while.
That was really interesting to see them fail at giving defeaters for Danny being his own justification. But I was really surprised more than anything that nobody jumped on them saying that belief in God is properly basic.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
why didn't that happen?
I don't know.
Danny said he wanted to talk about reform.
Yeah, I should have jumped on it.
I did. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, but they didn't get to that.
Jack, how did you think I did? Like,
Jack's
especially
getting
like in the
pulled over.
beginning and the end. Jack, don't drive.
It was mixed.
Pull over.
Wait, how did I do, Jack?
Danny did a lot better.
Did I mess up?
He did more talking. That's why Danny did better. He did more talking.
Yeah, you should have let him do all the talking.
Jack, what do you...
Oh my god. Wait, Jack,
Wait,
I want to
what,
know.
Jack?
I need real feedback. Like, did I say something stupid?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I thought you could have pushed harder, but I thought you did a pretty good job on the.
Okay, so it's just a matter of
That's
strategy.
exactly
not
how
like,
I felt. I don't think you said anything stupid or anything.
well, I was hopefully. I honestly, I wanted more Yuri. Like, I was trying to be like. I thought I was just going to be in the background, but then Yuri is still an invertebrate, and
Yuri had a few good moments. One moment was when he said, "What's the argument?"
Yes, that was good.
That was really good. And so then he
said comments.
Then he did the Darth. Then Josh Bristor did the Darth Dawkins thing where he asked a question: how could consciousness exist?
Burden.
Yeah, and so then Yuri said burden shifting. That was very good.
But he
responded totally knocked off balance.
Yeah, he actually said common sense. It's just common sense.
That was another one.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, Jack, what do you think of Bristor's closing?
Was infuriating.
That was.
Oh yeah, I fucking want to face fuck that guy. I want to face fuck that guy until it comes out of his mouth.
When he said they gave 5 or 6 arguments, I got really angry listening to that. I gave 5 or 6 other arguments, but I'm getting hold on the Kalam, so let's go to those. Like that, that pissed me off. That was such a stupid thing to say. Oh my god, I would have eviscerated that guy.
He's a ridiculous person.
It's just him talking shit. It's just like him.
But he's just a clown. I mean, he was like literally, he's literally brain damaged.
Yeah,
really
literally. You guys have said that. You guys have said that in anticipation for the debate, and I thought you guys were just like insulting him. But no, I mean I could literally tell in his speech pattern and everything that he has some cognitive disability.
I love that during the debate too. The moderator had to tell him like, stop interrupting. We're not gonna.
Yeah, that was good.
Oh yeah,
he was like 3 times.
They
got like super frustrated.
I like the other guy because he actually said, I have to think about that. At one point.
Yeah, that was surprising because that guy is usually like so dogmatic.
But I try to disarm people by saying, "Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you," and then they're like, "Oh, really?" And then they're a lot more.
My favorite part was when Josh yelled, "Then why aren't you a theist?" Did anybody else hear that?
Yeah.
My favorite part was when Yuri calls him out for name dropping, and his response to it was just to drop another name.
That's funny. But yeah, which is really cool. So I'm gonna have another chance to do this again and really show myself. I'm debating actually a PhD on the 18th. Hopefully, So that might.
Does anybody know if Bristor got a PhD? I mean, it seems like he was in school.
Who's Yuri debating?
Dr. Fuzz. He has a PhD.
Oh, that guy, Fuzz Rana?
I think so.
He agreed to debate you?
That's crazy, right?
No, Josh is organizing the debate, so he says he wants me to debate that guy on the 18th.
Can you get Danny to do it instead?
No, I'm going to do it myself. Danny did most of the talking, especially because the morality discussion was so long. But, it's fine. Me and Danny did a good job, I wish I would have jumped in. I should have just interjected and said, hey, I could have ran the open question argument. I also could have ran the Euthyphro dilemma.
Yuri, I think there's a
routes I
problem with your style of learning. This is let me help you with your style of learning. You should not be asking the question, okay, if they say this, how do I respond?
Concrete, please mute your microphone or I'll do it for you.
I think the wrong style. I just muted him. I think the wrong style of learning, Yuri, is asking, okay, if they say this, what should I say in response to that? You won't learn the fundamentals of what you need to do to respond. And if they do come to a question that you've never heard of, right? Then because that's how you learn, right? You want to know what are the responses to these questions, right? And I think if you learn the arguments fundamentally and like really develop your basic ontology and metaphysics, for instance, like then I think you'll grow out of like, okay, if they say this, then I respond with that. If they say this, I respond with this mentality.
I think maybe we should just let Danny debate all the Christians.
I'm doing this, Jack. Jack,
Wait,
why are you doing this, man?
Wait, why are you saying that, Jack?
Well, because then none of us
become an ape.
Yeah, none of us have to do any work. You do a good job, and that will mean the atheists will win the debate. That means the atheist side will win the debate.
I think I'm still a theist, so I don't know if I was borderline uncomfortable there. The way I felt better about it is that.
Well, did you feel at any point that they had an objection
and I
you didn't have a
everything
good
I
answer
said.
to?
No, I believed everything I said too.
So that's good, right? That's all that I'm saying.
Right, but I still believe in God.
Yeah, I understand that you still believe in God, but until you encounter a theist until you encounter a theist who can give you an argument that you don't have a good response to, you might as well debate all the Christians.
Oh, that's true. That's how I subconsciously looked at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I can't believe that I was able to get away with this debate because I was super scared that something was going to happen.
Thank God Danny came to your aid.
No, not that, Jack. I was just saying, I'm surprised my parents. We can't hear you, Jovan. You're just shit. Yeah. I'm surprised my parents didn't call me like during the debate because I texted my mom and was like, "Hey, don't." I made this like BS excuse. I was like, "Hey, don't call me, okay?" Because my headphones don't always work, and I don't like, my pants are so tight that it's a pain to take my phone out of my pocket to answer your call. So just don't call me. Yeah, and she bought that.
You're gay.
Bought you tight pants, huh?
Right.
She bought. Yeah,
don't
she
worry,
bought.
Mom, I'm just gay. Don't call me.
Oh,
So
I used to work at
Yuri.
I used to work at
Big Chum Michael. Hold on.
what's up?
I can't download it for some reason, even though the video's up in the full length. It won't let me download it. In
Wait,
whatever.
Tom, you
got it.
recorded it, right?
I'm all
Tom,
tabbed.
Oh, it'll upload. I mean, they're
Yeah, but Michael said they sometimes delete videos if they think that they've not done too well.
Oh.
Yeah. You
Oh wait, I thought Tom recorded it. Tom, you recorded it, right, bud?
I got it.
He's got it.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. I'm sorry about
what
that.
are
I
you
got
using
teams.
to get it?
I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Danny.
Michael, do you hear me?
There's extensions for Firefox.
Maybe not the last thing you said.
Yuri too.
I just asked you what you were using to get it.
I'd like to give a shout out to Jack Angstrake, Tom's Unboxing, and of course the Tom Rabbit YouTube channel. You should have done that. I'm really upset I didn't hear that.
Sorry,
JJ,
I couldn't.
I'm sorry. I'm super sorry about that, Tom. I totally forgot.
To get the recording.
It's really messed up, man. You totally told me you're gonna like do that.
No. Next time on the Dr. Fuzz on May 18th, man. If I get that down, yeah, I'm definitely shouting you guys out, man.
If you get Danny in there to help him, Danny will be sure to remember.
Yeah, it was so rude, though, in my opinion, that they got to shout themselves out, but they never even asked me about if I had a YouTube channel or anything, because I came on my actual account that has my YouTube channel and shit.
Yeah. Next time, Yuri, have some notes prepared, and then you can remember for the shoutouts.
Oh, I did
You
have
notice
notes.
that Yuri kind of talks like John? Like in his
We've been noticed that. Oh, fuck.
He talks,
See, I can do that.
So
he talks like Curtis Page.
So I use save from, and it is not picking up the URL, despite the fact that it is up. Tom, did you record the debate?
No. I recorded it.
Okay.
Okay, good. At least somebody did.
But there's
I have a question.
League of Legends sounds on for a couple seconds.
Well, it's a podcast. They're going to upload it, right?
Well,
No,
Sometimes
They
we
got
don't.
hold, Danny.
Oh, they
hold
probably
them.
won't upload this one, right?
Yeah,
Who
we hold
knows?
them, man. You freaking wrecked them, Danny. They're not uploading that shit, man.
Correction, Danny wrecked them.
I wrecked them at the end and the beginning, so that's Danny just took like the middle part.
I really can't believe that they like their last ditch effort was just to say intuition.
That was funny.
Yeah,
They all
that
say
was
that.
crazy. Dude, that was crazy.
They
They
all say
actually
that.
upheld the intuition simplicity.
Yeah, like I would have never done that as a Christian.
Well, I think the way I framed it, though, because they knew that if I said that, oh, well, what should we follow God's obligations or my own, right? That if they say, well, there's something that obligates us to God, then it's an external. They don't want to say that, right? I mean,
That
what
was
could they
one
say?
of the most embarrassing moments because you said, what if my intuitions go with me being the source of all morality? And they said they had a defeater for that.
Right. Yeah.
And then you asked them what the defeater it was, and it was to beg the question against that view. It was just unbelievable.
And he pointed that out. And he pointed that out too. Yeah.
It was just unbelievable. We have a defeater for that. The defeater is that our intuition is that wouldn't be the highest morality.
That's awesome.
It's
Yeah, that
just
was-
so crazy.
You guys did great. That was fun to listen to.
Fucking like creamed over them. They were so scared too because I think me not talking like for the middle part like made them even scareder. Or if scared was a word.
Even Yuri doing badly is.
Yeah,
No, but what I'm saying. No, but what I'm saying. Hey, why are you over talking me, Josh?
Shut your fucking
Sorry.
It seems like you could have a good argument to that effect, right? Like, you could argue that, well, God would be omniscient, and so it seems like if there are any norms with which you ought to be in accord, and God knows all the states of affairs, it'd be best to, on the assumption that he's being truthful, it'd be best to follow his orders, right? Like you could have an argument to that effect.
But they didn't make an argument like that.
Yeah, but why though?
Because they're dumbasses.
Exactly. Yeah, Jack got it.
It needed more Josh Bristor for me. That's what I wanted to hear.
Andrew didn't know what he was talking about. Andrew didn't just like provide anything. He was just like
Josh,
so boring.
Josh versus Yuri would be a fun debate. Josh
What was the
Bristor.
Did anyone else remember
That's
the
what I
fucking
wanted.
weird part where he just goes
Versus Yuri.
I'm getting tired, and we're getting
of
hold.
everyone just not hearing anyone else fucking talk? Yeah, what was the part where they went, we're just gonna take a 30-second break?
Yeah, that was classic.
Danny was
that
just
was
hilarious.
classic. It was a timeout.
He was Googling shit.
It was a timeout.
Danny was like, for what? What are we gonna do? What are we doing for 30
Danny
seconds?
was so confused. He's like, well, what is that? What
What are we
is that?
doing?
Yeah, what,
They called the
gonna sit here in silence for 30?
Yeah, they called the 30-second timeout after. I forgot what question I asked them, but after I asked them that question and Danny followed up, they said they had to do the 30-second timeout, which was like
that's
hilarious. I'm like,
usually
yeah.
when you call a timeout, it's so that you can consult with the coach, right?
Now the timeout was in virtue of Josh interrupting.
No, I
That's
understand
what it
that,
was.
but I'm just saying, like, it doesn't really make sense to have a timeout in that context unless there's a coach to consult, right?
Yeah.
It was just ridiculous.
Oh man, that was such a debacle. Well, but just not for us, but for what happened to them, man. I can't believe they can wake up and put on their pants in the morning, man. It's just.
Danny, if you had the chance to continue the intention and timelessness thing, what were you going to say?
What you mean at the very beginning? No, with the Kalam?
Danny was going to call them flaming bundles of trash.
Oh, there was an
Well, talk about-
interesting opportunity there, by the way. So
Yeah.
for one thing, well, Josh pointed out that if God has a timeless intention to create, there's no explanation for
The universe
why
would be
he
eternal.
created. Well, there's no explanation for why it was. Yeah, there's no explanation for why it was created 15 billion years ago rather than 6 minutes ago. But then I think another issue is that if he has a timeless intention to create, right? And they're granting that the creation is contingent, right? That means in some possible worlds he has the timeless intention to create, and in other possible worlds he doesn't, right? And so you then just have to ask them what explains why he has the intention in this world rather than in the other possible worlds, right? Now, if they appeal to some kind of, because they're just going to have to appeal to some kind of brute fact, brute contingency there. At that point, they're going to be contradicting their own commitment to the PSR, right? I thought there was something else I wanted to say. Well, at least that, right?
Or if there is an explanation, then what were you going to say? Like the idea is that if he had a reason, or if there was
then it would be necessitated, right? And they'd be necessitarians, which they denied being, right? But then if it would be a violation of aseity, right? What if nothing explains it, right? It seems like it's a fact external to God, right? That the world in which God has a timeless intention is the one that's a timeless intention to create is the one that's actualized. So it violates both the PSR and aseity for them to have a view like that.
I'm not quite understanding the part. The self-existence of God would be violated.
Well, it's no fact about God that explains it, right?
Right.
So that means it's not. That means that it's that whether
God depends on some other fact.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's the case that the God that exists is the one that has a timeless intention to create versus one that doesn't have that intention is in virtue of a fact that is not within God.
Libertarian free will. Oh, drop that fucking mic.
Yeah, so that would have been a good point to have pressed against them.
Yeah, what I thought I was gonna say was something like if he had the intention prior to creation and some kind of like atemporal eternal state or whatever that means, that would violate the actual infinite issue, like, because the universe would have always existed, right, or something like that.
Which it did.
Is that what about that response?
Say that again.
Well, if he's always had that intention, then. And if he thinks that the cause and the effect are simultaneous, then the universe has always existed, right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah. But say the universe always existed is consistent with it having a beginning.
Did you hear Josh say that he doesn't believe there's any actual there are no potential worlds or possible worlds, right?
Yeah. But then Yuri asked him if he was a necessitarian.
Right.
And he denied it. And that was one of the best parts of the whole debate, when they suddenly realized they weren't on the same page and they had to sort it out between them. That was just hilarious.
Danny, how do you feel about Jack saying that the world can be eternal and have a beginning?
Well, I think there's if you have an infinite number of events, if that's coherent, then is what Jack's saying is that there still would be a question as to what brought about those infinite set of events, right, Jack?
I was just saying that if it was the case that the universe had a beginning, that would be consistent with it having always existed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
it's not inconsistent with the universe having a beginning for it to have always existed.
I see.